Welcome to Margot Dreams of Baking. Today I'm going to share with you my favorite focaccia recipe. This focaccia bakes up nice and big, puffy, and it is super moist and tender inside. It's chock full of flavor and a joy to eat. Stick around and I'll show you how to make it. To start this focaccia, we make an overnight sponge, which improves both the texture and the flavor of the resulting focaccia. Mix together 58 grams of all-purpose flour with 58 grams of lukewarm water. Always use weight measurements because it will give you the most accurate results in your bread. Add to that a 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast and stir them together. Then cover and leave overnight for 8 hours or up to 24 hours before adding to your dough. My sponge has been resting for about 12 hours now, and it's starting to get some bubbles on the top. This can sit for up to 24 hours. So I'm going to put this into my large mixing bowl. And to that I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of instant yeast. Today I'm using the quick rise yeast just because it doesn't need to be bloomed in advance. So I'll just add that in over top of the sponge. And then I have 423 grams of hot tap water. That's just under 450 milliliters and about 1 3/4 cups. And I'll just stir that around to distribute all the yeast and all of the sponge through the water. Now to that, I have 3 cups or 423 grams of all-purpose flour, and 181 grams, or it's 1 cup plus 2.5 tablespoons of bread flour. And I have 11 grams or 2 teaspoons of salt. I'm just going to stir that all around till it's combined. This is a wetter dough. I love working with wetter doughs because you just get such a nice airy bread, much lighter. The more flour you add, the denser your bread's going to be. It can be a little intimidating sometimes to work with wet breads, but really they yield the best texture. So now that it's all mixed, I'm going to do a little bit of kneading. And because this is a little bit of a wetter dough and stickier, I'm going to use what's called a slap and fold technique. And that's where I bring it up, slap it down, and fold it over. Alright, so I don't need to do this for too long because I'm going to be going through some stretching folding processes after this. So it just needs to sort of get a bit more stretchy, but it's not going to get to the point where I'm making windows yet. I just realized as I was doing this, I made a bit of a mistake with my water measurement. And what I did was I did the flour measurement as the water measurement as well. I did 423 grams of flour as well as 423 grams of water, and it should have been 460. So I can add that in right now. What I'm going to do is just grab my scale and pour out some tap water and pour in another 17 grams of water, as well as a tablespoon of olive oil, which I was going to be adding at this step anyways. All right, I've got my scale and my hot tap water. It might seem like 17 grams isn't much, but it will make a bit of a difference, so I want to add that in. And I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of olive oil. And at this point, I just mix with my hands to get it all incorporated into the dough. All right, that's all mixed in now. It feels nice and soft. So I'm going to cover this and let this rise in a warm environment for 30 minutes before I do my first stretch and fold. My dough has been resting for half an hour now, and I'm going to perform a series of stretch and folds. So to do that, I grab one side of the dough, stretch as much as I can without tearing, and drag it over. You can see how soft this dough is. It's going to make a lovely airy focaccia bread. And the reason we do these stretch and folds is it just gently stretches those gluten bonds and helps the dough to rise better. And it means that you don't need to knead it as much because this is another form of kneading. All right, now that I've done all four sides, I'm going to put that back in my warm place, covered, to rise for another half hour and then stretch and fold again. I'm going to do a total of 4 rounds of stretch and folds before my next step. I've done 3 stretch and folds, and I'm just about to do my 4th one. So I'll do that. The dough has started to rise really nicely in the bowl. And as I stretch it, I can feel it's becoming much stronger. I'm going to transfer it to a 9 by 13 baking pan, but first I'm going to liberally oil it with some olive oil. I have a really nicely strong tasting olive oil for this one because I just find it gives the bread so much more flavor. So this is one, it says it's for pizza and pasta. And I'm making sure there's a good coating of oil, and this is going to ensure that my focaccia won't stick to the pan once it's baked. So now that I've done that, I'm going to transfer the dough to the middle of my pan. From here, I'm going to let it sit for another half hour and then just gently start to stretch it towards the edges of the pan. And I'll do that every half hour until it has filled the pan. After that, I'll let it sit until the dough has pretty much completely filled the pan, and I look to see how jiggly it is. Jiggling is always a good sign of air in the dough, and it's a sign that it's ready for me to bake. Once I get to that stage, I'll show you what it looks like in a close-up and what I'm looking for before I start to top it. It's been an hour since I dumped the dough into the pan, and it's almost all the way filled, but there's still a little space in the corners here. So I'm going to let it go another half hour and push it out again. At that point, I'm going to let it sit until it pretty much reaches the top of the pan right here. You can see that there's already lots of bubbles starting. These will show up in the final focaccia. It's just lots of air pockets that makes for a really, really nice, airy and light focaccia. So I'll show you what it's like when it has risen to where I want it to be before baking. My focaccia dough has now finished rising. It has filled out the corners of the pan and has risen pretty much to the top of the pan. My last test that I do is the jiggle test. When it jiggles like this, you know it's full of air and ready to bake. Before adding toppings, I'm going to use my fingers and poke to the bottom of the focaccia pan. I've wet my fingers before doing that so that the dough won't stick to my fingers. You can see all those lovely bubbles rising up to the top that were in the dough. Now I'm going to start adding my toppings. Today I've chosen to use tomatoes and rosemary. But you can top it with anything you want. Olives are popular, potatoes, lots of different herbs, or just plain old rosemary if you would like. Lots of choice in adding your toppings. You're going to just put them into the holes that you see and just gently press them down, but not all the way to the bottom. Then you can sprinkle them with dried herbs or fresh herbs and some sea salt over top. If you don't have sea salt, you can also use kosher salt. You just want something that has a bit of a bigger grain. The last step before baking is just to drizzle some olive oil over the top. Once that's all done, you're ready to bake. Bake the focaccia at 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 230 Celsius for about 20 to 25 minutes, rotating halfway through until it's golden. Be careful in the last 5 minutes because it does brown quite quickly. My focaccia is all baked. It took about 20 minutes in the oven and I rotated it halfway through. And it rose beautifully in the oven. You can see where all those air bubbles were. And I cut a piece. It's so tall and spongy, and the texture is really, really soft and moist. It really is a beautiful bread. It takes a little bit of time to make, some time to rise, but it's well worth it for the texture that you get from this focaccia bread, and it is so delicious. You'll notice it makes a really big focaccia. So what I do, I usually serve it for dinner one night, and then I cut it into squares that I think are about a serving each, and put it in the freezer, and it reheats really nicely in the toaster oven the next day, or the oven if you don't have a toaster oven. And it's just such a lovely treat. My whole family loves this bread. I hope you try it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Check out my playlist for more videos.